It may shock you to know that some nation of the world has been embroiled in conflict for just under a century whilst the world turns away, pretending not to notice. Thousands killed and millions displaced, and you would rarely hear about it on the news, despite its severity. With factions and groups passionate for their causes, it appears that the war will not end anytime soon. Prepare yourselves and pay attention, as I'm going to introduce you to the wars that have held Burma down for as long as it has existed. Today, Burma, or should I say Myanmar, is under control of a military junta led by General Min Aung Hlaing. Hlang's army currently fights in numerous rebel groups in Myanmar, hoping to remain in control of the country he rules over. But as I discuss the present, it's important to know the past, for the conflict in Burma isn't linear, but a multi-dimensional background for groups with their own individual aims and objectives. It's 1886, and the British decide to integrate Burma into the British Raj, a predecessor state composed of modern-day Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and of course, Burma. Over the years, Burma grew to a major rice exporter, yet their relationships between the locals and the British were strained, to say the least. Britain, now bankrupt from the Second World War and tired of the endless guerrilla war in the country, granted Burma independence in 1948. They intended to place politician Aung San in power in the newly formed nation. Most unusually, Aung San had a troubled past. At the start of the war in the early 1940s, he founded the Burmese Communist Party, allying himself with the Japanese Empire who promised him an independent Burma. However, for Aung San, he soon realised that after Japan decided to invade Burma, they could no longer be trusted and changed sides, starting to negotiate with the British. But this didn't matter much, as Aung San was mysteriously assassinated just a couple of years after the war ended. This meant that Xiao Shwe-tek became Prime Minister, and for the next few years, Burma was democratically governed. Now, it's worth telling you that the demographics in Burma are by no means homogeneous. It isn't one of those countries inhabited by a single people, but rather many. The majority of Burma's population consists of the Bamar, an ethnic group comprising 68% of the population and by far the majority in the country. But there are also minority groups with strong identities and cultures, such as the Kayin, Shan, Rakhine, Mon, Chin, Pao, and Kachin, just to name a few. Democracy continued until 1962, when Prime Minister U Nu's government came under strain from disgruntled ethnic groups and internal unrest. Over the years, the Burmese army, known as the Tatmadaw, grew increasingly powerful, and at this point, the resistance movements for the Shan and the Kayar claimed that they had every right to secede from Burma. The Tatmadaw, however, would not stand for this. The leader of the army, Ne Win, stepped in and proclaimed himself head of a newly formed socialist military government. The Tatmadaw believed that the democratic governments were weak, and to be truly efficient, only a few people should be making the decisions. Not long after taking power, Ne Win put down a student protest by blowing up the union building of the university. The university did not open again until 1964. Ne Win attempted to shift the country to socialism by nationalising businesses and centralising administration. Ne Win also initiated a programme of Burmanisation, where facilities were forced to assimilate with the standards of the Burmese majority. If they didn't, then the military would suppress their resistance movement. Oppression continued, with multiple ethnic groups and opponents being forcefully attacked to maintain Ne Win's dream of a united, self-sufficient Burma. He ruled with an iron fist for many years, making Burma a hermit state with one of the least developed economies in the world. This was until 1988, when common people across Burma finally had enough of Ne Win's authoritarian regime. It was here when Aung San Suu Kyi, daughter of revolutionary Aung San, became an advocate for democracy in the rebellion. The rebellion intensifies, and Ne Win can't handle the pressure anymore, so he abdicates, resulting in one of his subordinates, So Maung, taking power. The rebellion was crushed, and Aung San Suu Kyi was placed under house arrest. Military rule continued, with its size growing to 400,000, and an important emphasis was placed on the country's military during this time. Not only this, but the country's name was changed to Myanmar in an attempt to homogenise the population further, as Burma only represented 7/10 of the population, who were Burmese. But the damage was done, and the cracks in the government would eventually show. In 2011, Myanmar leader Thein Sein passed a number of reforms which freed prisoners, allowed unions and protests, and built up relations with the rebel groups of the Shan and Karen. Eventually an election was held, with Aung San Suu Kyi's party winning in a landslide. She was unable to leave Myanmar due to bizarre marriage laws, but the future finally looked bright for a nation that has only known war. Myanmar was now a democracy, albeit a flawed one. In 2017, the military was accused of genocide when suppressing the rebellious actions of the Rohingya Muslims, who fought as they believed that they were promised an independent state. Over 1 million were displaced and fled into neighbouring Bangladesh. This, however, damaged Aung San Suu Kyi's reputation even more, as somebody who was representing democracy had a reaction that was far too mild. But in 2021, Myanmar reverted back to their old ways. The president signed the military, who had a permanent presence in parliament, back into power. Now the leader of the coup, Min Aung Hlaing, was in control of Myanmar, which he still is, to this day. Now Myanmar remains governed by the country's highest ranking generals, and democracy is but a thing of the past. Many individuals, however, don't want it to be that way. In 2021, when the coup started, students from across the country banded together and formed their own armed rebel group. They called it the Student Armed Forces, or the SAF for short. The group doesn't just protest, they fight too. Having received training from the Arakan Army, one of the regional militias fighting for independence, the SAF frequently launched ambushes on the Tatmadaw in an attempt to slowly weaken their influence on Myanmar. These students are young, educated citizens, proving that not just those in the isolated edge of the country wish to be liberated. The Tatmadaw often results in conscription to swell its ranks. One story goes as follows. A father of 3 is conscripted from his village to fight for the Tatmadaw. He's sent for training and is eventually deployed to the Karen state, one of the most brutal fronts of the civil war. He tells this to his wife, who he promises he will return to. But he never did. In fact, the only thing she received from her deceased husband was 70,000 kyats, or about $21. Other soldiers report grueling 3-month training, which if they try to leave, their homes will be destroyed. Because of the terrible treatment from their superiors, many soldiers have left to join rebel organisations such as the PDF, another organisation which fights against the Tatmadaw. There have also been organisations that have been fighting for independence since Myanmar as a nation began. One such instance is the Karen National Army. The army was formed to push for independence of an independent state for the Karen people, who believe themselves to be very different to the Burmese majority of Myanmar. Therefore, they believe that they must fight to remain recognised, in the hopes that one day they achieve a nation that truly represents them. At the moment, they involve themselves in 3D printing weapons that they hope will be used to defeat the Tatmadaw once and for all. Myanmar's past is complex, and its future is uncertain. The numerous groups have been fighting for freedom for only a few years, and some for nearly a century. But one thing is certain, that these people will only stop when they see a democratic Myanmar which represents all. Please do like and subscribe for this channel to grow and for me to keep making these entertaining videos.